Hey, okay. Ohayo gozaimasu. Gosankai tadaki arigato gozaimasu to our colleagues in Japan. Thank you also to our colleagues joining from Canada. I am Shannon Joseph. I'm the chair of Energy for a Secure Future. And we're very happy to have you join us for this conversation. Can Canada deliver? Reflecting on Canada's new energy reality. To start off, I'd like to just talk about one housekeeping item. For the for this conversation, we do have simultaneous interpretation available. You would have seen that on the waiting room screen. So if you would like to listen to the conversation in English, just click on original audio. There's a little symbol there that looks like a globe, so original audio. If you would like to listen to the conversation in Japanese, you can go to that same icon and select Japanese and enjoy the conversation. So that's just a quick housekeeping item. I'd like to start off as well by thanking our partners at the Institute of Energy Economics Japan for all their support and collaboration and the work we've done over the past few months to kind of get to this point and to have this conversation with you. I'd also like to say a special thanks to the Embassy of Canada to Japan, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce of Japan, and the Japan Gas Association. So thank you all very much for your collaboration over these past few months. Energy for a Secure Future has kind of a multi-pronged mission. One is really focused on the domestic energy conversation in Canada. The other is focused on the role that Canada can play globally in energy. And this conversation is very much connected to that global role. And what we are very excited about doing is really bringing together the people in Canada who are working on energy, energy for export, in this case, LNG, whether it is industry people, First Nations leaders who in Canada, Indigenous peoples are involved at all parts of the value chain for our LNG. And it's a very exciting time that we want to share with you. And of course, we want to bring in the customer. And so we're very happy to have in our panelists today representation from all of that, because having that customer conversation and dialogue with the producer and kind of First Nation proponent conversation is important for us to have a shared understanding about each other's needs and realities so that we can work together to build a more secure future. We'll be hearing today from Jeff Tonkin, who's the chairman of Rockies LNG, Yun Nishizawa, who's a senior fellow with the Institute of Energy Economics Japan, Karen Ogan, who is the CEO of the First Nations LNG Alliance, Charlene Gale, who's the chair of First Nations Major Projects Coalition, and Trevor Kennedy, who's the vice president Indo-Pacific for the Business Council of Canada. So I'm grateful to all of our panelists and speakers today for your involvement in this conversation. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff Tonkin to give us some opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shannon. Good morning to everyone. Thank you for attending our event today. My name is Jeff Tonkin. I am the chairman of Rockies LNG, which is a consortium of 13 Western Canadian natural gas producers in Canada who will supply gas to the Silizums LNG project. I am also chairman of Birchcliff Energy, which produces about 80,000 barrels a day of natural gas and oil, also in Western Canada. I'd like to thank the Energy for a Secure Future and to all of those joining us today from Japan and across Canada. First, it is a show of Canada's interest today at the civil society level to engage with and be a partner to countries like Japan in the area of energy security, environmental performance, and economic cooperation. Second, it marks an important milestone for Canada, Indigenous peoples, and the Canadian natural gas industry working together in a positive and mutual beneficial way to improve life in Canada and to create benefit for our allies around the world through responsible development of energy projects. I want to acknowledge this impressive work of Karen Ogan of the First Nation LNG Alliance and Charlene Gale of the First Nations Major Projects Coalition, who are on the panel today. Your organizations and members are at the forefront of this new reality for energy and resource development in Canada. Energy security is an important need. It supports quality of life for households and communities, enabling health, education, and stability for the standard of life that we all enjoy. It is also the ground for entrepreneurialism and industry. When energy is abundant and affordable, innovators can do things, make products, employ people, export. As an outside observer, part of Japan's international success as the exporter of many globally beloved products from Honda, Mitsubishi, Sony, Hitachi, Nintendo, to name a few. That has been your focus on secure energy supply as a country. When we look across the Indo-Pacific, we see many countries seeking to emulate this focus, to enhance energy access, to support better quality of life, and a more robust economy for their populations. Increasingly, liquefied natural gas, or LNG, is seen as having a vital role to help countries move away from coal, integrate wind and solar, and most importantly, act as a low-emission, energy-dense foundation for domestic energy security. Looking more widely, particularly in the wake of the Russia-Ukraine war, we see that LNG will have a critical global role going forward. And in this, Canada is positioned to be a partner of choice, in no small part because of the important work of partnership between Indigenous peoples and industry. As we would have seen, I am the chairman, as you would have seen, I am the chairman of Rockies LNG, a group of 13 of Canada's largest upstream natural gas producers, including my company, Birchcliff Energy. Rockies LNG partners together represent 8 billion cubic feet, or half of Canada's natural gas production. We also represent 80 trillion cubic feet, or half of Canada's proven natural gas reserves. Rockies is part of the Silizim's LNG project, a unique partnership between the Nisga'a Nation, a modern Treaty First Nation in the Canadian province of British Columbia, Western LNG, an experienced LNG developer, and Rockies LNG, which is a partnership of Canadian natural gas producers. The project is currently in the regulatory review process, and its pipeline, Prince Rupert Gas Transmission Pipeline, is under construction. When complete, it will export 1.6 BCF per day, roughly the same size as the LNG Canada Phase 1. It will support our partners around the world with energy and advance reconciliation in Canada, as well as broad economic benefits and jobs across our domestic supply chain. Environmentally, this project will be fully electrified. When electricity supply is confirmed, and this project will deliver some of the lowest emissions LNG in the world. Upstream producers have been achieving some of the lowest methane levels and continue to innovate in our operations. In our supply chain, steel manufacturers like Tenaris are working with the province of Ontario and electricity suppliers to produce some of the lowest emission steel pipe for our operations. There is high environmental value at a competitive price in Canada's LNG. As in any jurisdiction, there are opponents to our project and others. But we are on a firm foundation to advance as a rule of law nation and as a sector focused on partnership. The Nisga's and other Indigenous nations are front and center in engaging other communities and making these projects a success. That said, I would say to you as a potential customer of the LNG, is that many in Canada don't know the energy realities and options of Asia. They don't have a sense of why LNG and eventually blue ammonia from Canada are important and worth developing. In this, you can help us. We need to hear from you in Canada that LNG is important for your energy security, for your environmental goals, and for your long-term stability of the Indo-Pacific. We also need to hear that you want LNG from Canada because we share important values: transparency, democracy, and the rule of law. Through ongoing dialogue and building shared understanding, we can advance together with broad support and for the benefit of all our people. We at Rockies LNG and our partners look forward to working with you and delivering for you. Again, sincere thanks to the Energy for a Secure Future and everyone participating today. Enjoy the discussion, and I will be available for questions along with the other panelists. Thank you very much. Shannon?
Thank you so much, Jeff. And now we're going to move on to our panel discussion. So I'll ask our panelists to just turn on your cameras. And to get us started, I wanted to start off with Nishizawa-san. Can you tell us all, why is LNG important to Japan? And why is Canada's role as an LNG provider important? Nishizawa-san, you're muted. Sorry.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you, Shannon and Jepson. Thank you for your remarks, and good evening or morning, everyone. Well, thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak about Canada and LNG in front of everyone. It's a great honor. As a starting point, I'd like to make it clear that it's important for Canadian people to understand that Japan needs LNG for energy transition away from coal-fired electricity, power, and to support its integration of renewable energy. LNG also has an important energy security role that is made clear in the current Basic Energy Plan of Japan announced in 2021. And this plan covers carbon neutral targets towards 2050 and strategies to achieve them. And to be more specific, the government assumed that Japan would reduce carbon emission by as much as 46% in 2030 compared with 2013. And to make this happen, the government set some targets in power sector, which is the most crucial. The major targets are, number one, to decrease power generation from approximately 1,000 terawatt hour in 2020 to 930 terawatt hour in 2030. This is 7% reduction. This was assumed possible by declining Japanese population and improvement of power consumption efficiencies. And second target was to significantly increase power from renewable and nuclear from approximately 25% in 2020 to 58% in 2030. It's a big jump by about 33%. And the third target was to significantly decrease power from coal and to some extent LNG from 69% altogether to 39% by about 30% reduction. And I like to say the government efforts made so far have been great. Renewable and nuclear last year in 2023 reached 22.3% and 9% respectively. Okay, this is a more than 6% increase compared with 25% in 2020. Okay, excuse me, sorry. Excuse me.
Are you
All right, yeah. It's okay. All right. So all in all, what I want to say is, and on the other hand, renewable is not growing as I said, renewable is not growing as I expected. So the conclusion is, all we have to do is, we have no other choice but relying on the energy. This is a situation Japan is facing. And as for the importance of Canada, as energy provider, this is exactly what I discussed with Minister of METI a few months ago in the context of the importance of diversifying supply source of LNG. The current LNG market is about 400 million ton, and this is expected to grow to 600 to 700 million ton in 2040. And I ask you, who is going to be supplier of this 600 to 700 million ton of the LNG in 2040? As you know, USA and Qatar, along with Australia, are the two major LNG producers even now. And the point is that only USA and Qatar has potential to grow throughout the future. And as a result, I assume that share of these two countries, which is now about 40%, is going to grow as high as 60 to 70% in 2040. And I believe this is too heavy dependency in terms of energy security. And both countries are, of course, the great, the countries, as you know. And but for example, the Biden administration placed a temporary memorandum on issuing the LNG permissions, especially for the export to non-FTA countries. And of course, the restrictions on Panama Canal and geopolitical risk of Middle East are also big, the concerns in terms of the energy security globally. So we need Canada as a new, reliable, strong energy, LNG supplier. And this is the, important role of, Canada. I would like to stop here now. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that. And I think that's a great context for my next question, which I want to throw over to Karen. Canada's ability to respond to some of the needs that Yoon is described is evolving, and Indigenous peoples are playing an important role in that. And so maybe to start off, Karen, can you talk to the audience about First Nations LNG Alliance? What is it? What are you guys working towards? And how does that fit with what Nishizawa-san was talking about?
Thank you, Shannon. The First Nations LNG Alliance has started approximately 10 years ago when the Coastal GasLink project had started from the northeast of British Columbia to the northwest to the coast of Haisla. And so it was quite a controversial line. There was nations that wanted to participate in supportive and sustainable LNG opportunities in Canada. So that was why we started the alliance, because a lot of people didn't know what LNG was and what are the benefits coming back to our nation. So since the 1970s, we didn't have a voice or a seat at the table. We needed education and awareness on LNG. And we also needed to let the people know what the economic benefits were. Also, in relation to that is the notion of equity ownership opportunities for our nations. We see that as an economic path forward for Indigenous communities. So a part of our mission was to provide balanced information to First Nations citizens about sustainable LNG projects. The other piece was to educate constituents, industry, and the public about sustainable LNG opportunities. And the other piece was to cooperatively advance shared interests with industry and government. So I think there was 3 players at the table: Indigenous people, government, and industry. And the most of all, we wanted to ensure that there was the highest environmental standards being upheld and maintained from beginning to end of all of these projects, because First Nations, we view ourselves as the stewards of the land. That's our role. So part of our mandate with the Alliance our focus was on advocacy on behalf of First Nations, resource sharing to provide information and experience to support First Nations, and research. We want to provide in-depth findings and insight on LNG and resource development topics, and to collaborate with various universities. Education, we wanted to educate nations to become informed and educate their members on what LNG is and what it isn't. And again, environment, we want to ensure the highest environmental standards are being met and maintained. So our priorities at the Alliance, our guiding principles are ensuring that people know what Indigenous reconciliation is. And that comes from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report. In that report, it also discusses economic reconciliation. And this is something that all First Nations in Canada are striving towards, is become economically independent and being able to stand on our own 2 feet. We want thriving communities. We want to ensure that there's environmental stewardship happening on the land. And at the same time, we're addressing climate change and providing energy security. So we want to continue to communicate First Nations messages. We have it on all social media channels, on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or X, and Instagram. So we also have a lot of, on our website as well, we have all of our podcasts and videos and some of our webinars to continue to communicate to all citizens, whether it be in Canada and even internationally. So a lot of our members that we have is from the Haisla Nation. We have Chief Crystal Smith, who's our Alliance Chair. We have President Eva Clayton, who's the president of the Nisga'a Nation. We have the Huu-ay-aht First Nation Chief Counselor, John Allen Jack. We have Jade Irwin from the Skintyee Nation. We have Counselor Ellen Lawrence from the Tsilhqot'in Nation. We have Jackie Thomas from Tsaykas First Nation. Hereditary Chief Clifford White from the Gitxaala Nation. Counselor Heather Newski from the Wet'suwet'en First Nation. And we, as members, we have Darren McCormick from the Kitsillas First Nation, and also Chief Michelle Joe from the Mi'kmaq First Nation out of Newfoundland and Labrador. So what we hope to attain is that there are some messages getting out that Canada isn't open for business, in which we are. They need the support, they need the relationship with Indigenous people to continue to do business nationally and internationally. So Indigenous people are part of the main players moving forward for both Canada and for other countries to produce LNG and be able to sell it. And part of that is ensuring that at the same time, Indigenous people have equity ownership in these projects. And I think Charlene would probably speak more to the major projects, but we just wanted to make sure that our voice is being heard. We have a seat at the table, and with every major project going throughout BC and Canada, Indigenous people are in the forefront. And part of our membership, we have affiliate members that sit at our board table as well. And those companies are LNG Canada, FortisBC, TC Energy, and Enbridge. And we are still at this time recruiting more affiliate members to join our board. But the one stipulation is that affiliate members cannot vote on admitting new members or on issues affecting Aboriginal rights and title. So there are benefits to the First Nations LNG Alliance. It's the only organization of its kind in BC and in Canada that advocate for LNG, specifically for First Nations, because back in the 1930s, we did not have a seat, and now we do. So we want to continue to let people know that Canadian LNG is Indigenous LNG. Projects cannot go forward without the Indigenous people sitting at the table. Masai.
Thank you, Karen. Charlene, First Nations Major Projects Coalition is also part of this new story, this new relationship. Talk to us a bit about your organization and its work.
Well, thank you. Good morning and good evening, everybody. I want to begin by recognizing and honoring the lands from which I'm privileged to join today's event, which is the Treaty 8 territory belonging to nearly 40 First Nations in British Columbia, Alberta, and Saskatchewan, and specifically my territory, the Fort Nelson First Nation. So the First Nation Major Projects Coalition is a nonprofit organization with 175 First Nation members across Canada from coast to coast to coast. Our members work as a coalition of willing to enhance our economic, our cultural, and environmental well-being. And we understand that a strong, robust economy really relies on a healthy environment supported by our vibrant cultures, our languages, and expressions of our First Nation laws and customs. The coalition's core principles include being member-driven. We're very neutral and unbiased. We're a nonprofit society and value maximizing collaborative, reconciliation-minded, and project industry agnostic. So really proud of the work that we do, really taking the guidance of our members. Currently, the First Nation Major Projects Coalition is providing capacity support to 19 projects for our members located across the country. Each of them have an economic participation or ownership component to it. In total, our portfolio exceeds 50 billion in capital costs and represents a very diverse mix of projects in real estate, energy, infrastructure, and telecommunications sectors. We also support our First Nation members in a number of ways, such as negotiating First Nation ownership in major projects, securing access to competitively priced capital, and setting up priority First Nation procurement contracts, which is really important in this process. We also navigate environmental and impact assessments. And in the LNG space, we support our members that are involved in the Coastal GasLink project that will contribute to the Canadian LNG exports to Asia, including Japan. Our members are also involved in the Newfoundland LNG and Labrador projects that proposes to ship to LNG to Europe. And so in addition to this project support, we provide advocacy work and thought leadership to a variety of areas, including impact assessment materials for First Nations. We recently released our Spirit of the Land Toolkit, and we also released a National Indigenous Electrification Strategy. We also, for the past decade, provided advocacy for Indigenous access to capital. And we are proud to have long been working alongside in discussions with the federal government and the BC provincial government, both of whom recently announced their loan guarantee programs, and which is a good discussion to have today because I'm very proud of the work that has been done working in collaboration with government and industry. And I think that now that the work has been done, that there's some really good projects that are ready to go and should be funded, hopefully before 2025 with some announcements. And in my view, that would be the North Coast Transmission Project, the Coastal GasLink, and Cedar LNG. So I'm hoping that we'll see something here in the next couple of months. I'm just excited about the work that has been done. And I know that as Indigenous people, we really look forward to these projects and working with our partners to get these projects off the ground. What I would like to say to our Japanese and Asian partners is that the First Nation Major Projects members are deeply committed to developing new relationships and contributing to a cleaner supply of energy to global markets. Our members also prioritize sustainable development that balances economic growth and environmental stewardship, which also aligns with the global shift towards greener, more responsible energy practices, including in Japan. And for our Japanese and Asian partners, the First Nation Major Projects Coalition also really emphasizes on ownership, shared benefits, joint decision making, showcasing how First Nation people can be really vital business partners for international companies seeking to invest in Canada. There's a lot of great examples, but also we know our lands, we know our waters, and we know that with that, it really positions us as First Nations to be strategic partners. The last thing that I'll leave you with is every year we do a conference, and this will be our 8th annual First Nation Major Projects Conference. It will be in Toronto, and the theme this year will be Valuing Reconciliation in Global Markets. It's happening April 28th and 29th at the Sheraton Centre Hotel in Toronto. So we hope to see you there next April.
All right, that's a great context as well. Thank you, Charlene. And so now over to Trevor. I guess from a business standpoint, how is industry in Canada looking at these opportunities, looking at the region? You're opening an office, so I'll leave it over to you to kick that perspective off.
Well, thanks for that. And maybe I should start by just talking a little bit about my organization. I think some folks might not be familiar with who we are, but so the Business Council of Canada is a nearly 50-year-old organization based in Ottawa. We're a CEO-based council, and our members are in all sectors: energy sector, natural resources, and others. And really, I think over the past 50 years, we've seen our members become more global. And as they become more global, we need to respond to that as well. So under the leadership of our CEO, Goldie Hyder, last year we opened our first international office. It's in Washington, so I have a colleague now who works out of our Washington office there, are really focused on the Canada-US relationship. We brought in a couple of advisors to support us as well, one in Brussels to support the Canada-EU relationship, and another colleague now in Mexico City supporting the Canada-Mexico relationship. I have the really interesting task now of, as you can see, I'm not in Ottawa anymore. It's still sunny where I am, but the reason for that is I'm now based in Tokyo, and really pleased to be working from here for the next couple of years, or I should say 3 years, really to set up what will be the Business Council of Canada's Indo-Pacific footprint. So still a lot to be determined in how that all comes together, but I'm really pleased to be doing this work here from Tokyo. And for the many folks on the call, I'd love to meet many of you if you're based here in the city. So I think the choice to operate here is an interesting one. Japan is our closest partner across the Pacific Ocean. Sometimes it's not always obvious to Canadians, and also probably to Japanese as well. But we are neighbors across Pacific Ocean. We have significant trade and investment relationship, which continues to grow. It's many decades old, but we're seeing a lot of new opportunities come online, which I think, especially in the energy sector, a really new, interesting angle to that relationship. And in an increasingly challenging world, it's important to work with partners that share our values and share our interests. And Japan is one of our closest partners, not just in the Indo-Pacific, but in the world. So I think it's really great to be doing this work from here. Also a market that's deeply connected to the rest of the Indo-Pacific region, which also helps. Briefly, just about the Indo-Pacific, why we care about this part of the world. I think it's an important point to make, especially I think for folks who aren't based in Canada. But really the Indo-Pacific is critical to Canada's long-term economic interests. There's so much growth and so much with so many dynamic economies that are emerging that we need to really be close to and figure out how we're going to be successful. And I think it really is a key region for our trade growth, which has been a long-term interest for Canada, really diversifying our trade through growth, and really the Indo-Pacific probably represents the greatest opportunity for Canada. But as you can imagine, in a region as diverse as the Indo-Pacific, covering India and Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia, and so on, the interests vary, right? Canada has a lot that it looks to when it looks to this part of the world, but there's one theme that I think is universal and relevant to this discussion, and it's energy. And no matter where you go in the region, the type of energy that's of interest may change, but people do look to Canada, and I think Canadian companies really have a lot to bring to the table. And within that mix, I think one important point to make is that, and especially true in Northeast Asia, but also in some Southeast Asian markets, the interest in energy really has two key themes. I think one is, and I know Nishizawa-san and others mentioned this in their remarks, but there's a real interest in energy security, energy resiliency. That's become especially important over the past couple of years and events elsewhere. But at the same time, many countries across the region, including many emerging markets, have ambitious climate change targets. And to achieve those targets, they need energy, they need clean energy. And that's where I think Canada comes in and can be very important to help with their transition as they industrialize. So anyway, we're particularly well positioned, obviously, in the North Pacific. That's the government's term, but using Korea and Japan as two very close partners for Canada with similar market dynamics. I know this group here is here to talk about LNG, which is great. I think it appears to be one of the biggest opportunities for us in the Indo-Pacific region, certainly in the short to medium term, and perhaps even longer. But we're really excited to see LNG Canada come online. I think that's a significant project that will have a huge impact, not just on our bilateral relationship with Japan and our overall trade flows, but will have an impact on regional energy security, and hopefully also reduce some of the pressures that emerging economies are facing, elsewhere throughout the region. And I think I wish I took this picture with me, but I took my daughter to the Science Museum here one of my first days, just exploring our new neighborhood, and it's probably a few years old now, but there was a picture about where Japan's gas comes from. So it must be 5-6 years old at the picture now, but at the time, it was 20% was from Russia, 15% was from Iran. I think 15% was from Qatar. I know that's changed a lot now, but wouldn't that be beautiful someday to see Canada in the top 3 on that list? So anyway, that popped up, I guess, looking at that. But anyway, I hope to see many more LNG projects, as we hear more in the region. And I think this is a message to take back home to Canadians. But this came up in a trade mission we participated in last year, and I think Nishizawa mentioned this as well in his remarks, but the Panama Canal is a real serious concern. As the U.S. becomes a larger gas exporter, almost all of it, if not all of it, comes from the Gulf. All of it passes through the Panama Canal, which is facing its own challenges. And so when you look at Canadian gas from the West Coast, really we're in a unique position, I think, in a really great position. So briefly, just want to mention there's a lot of other energy things, lots of energy we can provide to the region. I'll probably mention that a bit more in some of my later remarks, but I would have to mention our friends who export LPGs as well. There's a lot of interest and a lot of success in this market. We're now in a position to export oil through TMX. Hydrogen projects, I think Canada could be in a great position, minerals, nuclear fuel, and so on. And I think as previous panelists noted, and I certainly wouldn't want to be the one to speak to this in any great length. It's not my area of expertise, but Indigenous partnership, I think, is really critical to success for Canada. We won't be successful if the Indigenous communities aren't leaders and actively involved. And I know our members, a lot of their domestic business in Canada, but also internationally, really rely on those partnerships. And I think it's really great to have this conversation today with prominent Indigenous leaders. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Trevor. And I think you set things up well for the next question, which, really looks at the broader region, because Japan also plays an important role in the kind of the regional energy story. So Nishizawa-san, you spoke about LNG's importance to Japan's goals. Can you talk a little bit about Japan's role as a partner to other countries in the Indo-Pacific? What will it strengthen Canada-Japan LNG trade and energy trade more broadly to some of the other kind of opportunities Trevor mentioned? What will that mean to kind of the energy security and emissions plans of some of Japan's, friends in the region?
Okay, I think there are two great meanings to strengthening Canada-Japan LNG trade. One is to further stabilize energy security in the region, as I said. And second is to standardize low carbon emission LNG in the region, which Jeff talked about a little bit. As for the first point, I'd like to emphasize that we will lose significant amount of LNG supply from traditional LNG providers in the region towards the future. Japan imported more than 3/4 of LNG from so-called traditional LNG providers in the region, such as Australia, Malaysia, Russia, Indonesia, and Brunei. Actually, the current Russian percentage is not 20%, it's only 9%, but it's still 9%. However, the capability of these traditional countries to provide LNG is expected to become much, much weaker, or perhaps flat at the best for the next 10+ years to come. Under such circumstances, Japan and the region really need a new LNG provider to survive. Otherwise, like it or not, we have to keep relying on coal more than we should. I would also like to point out that Japan uniquely stands at the closest position from west coast of Canada. This is a big advantage of Japan and Canada logistically. And talking about low carbon footprint LNG, yes, we must do our best to lower the CO2 emission in the energy production value chain. And LNG Canada is known to become as one of the lowest carbon footprint LNG producers. And this demonstrates that Canada has such potential to manage carbon emission, for example, by fully utilizing abundant power from hydro, or by taking advantage of a cooler temperature that requires the much less energy for LNG production. So I think Canada can establish a new carbon emission standard required for LNG production, and Japan should be able to support such efforts together with Canadian stakeholders.
Thank you. Thank you. And before I kind of move on to others, to jump in, I just wanted to remind our listeners, we're going to have a Q&A session at the end of the panel, which includes Jeff Tonkin, who spoke at the beginning. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. And once we get through this discussion, we'll be taking time to address any of the questions that you have. So thank you. So yes. We have this regional opportunity, and this opportunity is tied to opportunities in Canada, because to some of the comments that have been made, we really want to approach these projects in a win-win way. And there's been some very, I think, important stories of win-win. And so, Karen, can you take some time to speak about some of the experiences of your members? And I'm thinking of the Haisla Nation in particular, because they're the majority owners, First Nation majority owner of the Cedar LNG project. What has it meant to the nation to be involved in these projects? What have they been able to achieve economically, socially? Can you speak a little bit about that and its importance?
I think that Haisla had their Cedar LNG project. Their FID for Cedar had been approved at the end of June of this year. And this is probably the highlight of northern BC, especially on the coast, coming from no involvement to having that ownership of one of the largest investment projects in Canada. And so I think this is huge for the northwest of British Columbia. Huge for Haisla. They're setting the stage. They're creating a path for other First Nations to do the same. I think that's they're making history. They're making history in Canada. The Silisms is at their beginning stages of their construction as well. So there are two different levels altogether. And for the Haisla, I think that this has been an increase in their social programs for all members, whether they live in community or out of community. When I went to their FID, they had a brand new youth center built there. They have a lot of elders programs. And really what it's done is it's increased the quality of life for Haisla members. I've heard Crystal mention in other panels that for the first time, their members are able to acquire mortgages where they couldn't before. There's a high increase in employment, training, trades. It's just all the way around, economically, socially, culturally. It's increased the quality of life for the Haisla people. And I think that this is a good showcase for not only northern BC, but for other First Nations in BC or Canada to do the same. I think they're really helping to set the stage for other nations to thrive economically. And I think the other piece to that is that it's also providing long-term jobs, employment and trades. Like I said, the equity ownership piece. There's more revenue being poured back into the community. And I think that it's also provided energy security for Asian countries. Because what we do know is that a lot of the countries in Asia are still burning coal, which is the highest emitter of all. And that's what we want to be able to do is Canada has an opportunity to help other countries to get off of coal. And we have the resources to do that. And that's why we promote LNG. If we seriously are concerned about climate change globally, then we need to think globally and act locally. And that means getting our natural gas to market and exporting it from northern BC to Japan. And some of the advantages that we have is that distance. So if you were to compare it to the US, they have to go through the Panama Canal, which is 13 days, when here in Haisla, it's 9 days. So time is money. That makes a huge difference. It's a win-win-win across the board for Canada, for the Indigenous people, and for the countries that are receiving our natural gas. Those are ways that we're helping to provide that energy security for other countries. Meanwhile, building Canada economically, building the economics for Indigenous people. So it's a win-win-win across the board.
Thank you, Karen. And I think that win-win-win is really an important part of that new foundation that these partnerships and these projects and the way they're being designed are starting to provide. Charlene, I know First Nations Major Projects Coalition was involved in the establishment of a limited partnership ownership for, I think it was 19 nations. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that deal? Why the community said yes, and what do you, see that's hopeful in that in terms of, this new foundation for a positive future?
Well, thank you. I believe, just talking to a lot of the leadership that were involved in that transaction is, economic and equity participation means that you're informed and you have a voice at the table. You have the opportunity to have a fair share of the returns that align with the risks that First Nations have for hosting these major energy infrastructure projects within their territories. We always talk about being stewards of the land, and we have a lot of responsibility. So there is a lot of risks when we host projects like this. The economic gains, as Karen talked about, for the social change and development that's beyond the job creation and the financial returns. I, as a young person in the Fort Nelson First Nation territory, worked at the Fort Nelson gas plant for over 20 years, and I learned a lot in that process. And I think that, just for these communities, it's a real good opportunity, not only for their members, but also for their youth going forward. So with that, for one, these projects provide long-term employment opportunities. They really help develop the skills of our members. Our members get higher wages, and they have these long-term careers that are emerging in this sector. One of the things that we were able to do within our community is build a cultural center and also a trade center and really ramp up our infrastructure in our nation, pave our roads, have safe communities, build a health and wellness center. So a lot of great things have happened within our community. We have had a private school within our nation for the past 40 years. And it's a school where we invite everybody to come learn about who we are as people and learn our language and embrace our cultural practices into the territory. And I feel that the investors and government, when they come to our communities and celebrate annual celebrations, it really creates that togetherness that we really get to see the benefit of how our communities are being developed. And, it's no different as an Indigenous person that you want the same opportunities as you would get in the municipality, fresh drinking water, a nice place to raise your family and so forth. So I know that one of the things that I hear from Indigenous leaders is that you can't preserve your heritage and your language and your culture in poverty. We actually need to be able to have money so that we can reinvest in better housing, our environmental stewardship and sustainable practices. In Fort Nelson, we were able to really ramp up our lands department and put more guardians on the land so that we can work in silo in partnership with these projects through equity, but also maintaining our responsibility to being involved. In terms of supporting Canada to deliver, First Nations as right holders have been here for thousands of years, and we're very strategic partners with a proven track record of managing natural resource in a sustainable manner. We have our traditional knowledge and our elders and our land users that are always on the land, bringing back information to our people and our leadership. We can be reliable long-term partners in delivering Canada's energy to the world. And I believe that our consent, and I know that our consent has tremendous value. I believe that focusing by partnering with First Nations, that you will see that, we have a way of conducting our environmental stewardship. And it really helps ensure that First Nations are positioned well to help Canada meet its global energy demands while upholding international standards for sustainable and responsible development. And I look forward to really seeing the prosperity not only flow from these First Nation communities down from Northeast BC, but all the way to Haisla, and the impact that it will have on the growth of these communities in a very positive and meaningful way. I just like to add at the end that First Nations people, we are always wanting to stay within our communities and grow up alongside our grandparents and pass those teachings down. So having that opportunity to have a really good job within your territory will be very meaningful. And I know that a lot of these nations see the benefit of that. And I look forward to supporting them and helping them get these projects turnkey.
All right. Thank you. And Charlene, you spoke about some of the environmental work your community has been able to do to beef up, as these developments happen, the ongoing protection and stewardship of the land. I think this is a really important theme that is worth exploring. When I was in Japan in July, I had the opportunity to meet with many folks, including some folks in the Japanese government. One of the things that I heard in all of these conversations was the importance of the kind of cleanness of the supply chain for LNG in Canada, that this was an advantage that Canada had over the long term. And I know that this is something we've been working on as a country, kind of in a broader sense. Trevor, as the Business Council friend on the call, can you talk a little bit about all the work that Canada is doing to deliver on a low emission supply chain for LNG and for other fuels, emerging fuels like ammonia, which is a big conversation in Canada. Talk about, how are we going to create that advantage?
Yeah, sure. I think, very similar to your experience. We talk to businesses here, also in Korea, and I think other investors around the region. It's really clear that when they look at Canada, whether it's for energy or just to invest in manufacturing, other things, really one of the very important points in looking at Canada is how clean, I guess, our electricity is, how clean our extraction processes are, and so on. And I think we do have a great value proposition for LNG and LPGs. Looking at our export infrastructure, but also too, just on the industrial side, looking at Eastern Canada, for example, a lot of our electricity comes from hydroelectricity, I guess in the case of Quebec, nuclear in the case of Ontario, and I know that's been very important for companies looking to build batteries, to invest in the auto sector, other kinds of investments. So I think that's really started to emerge, and businesses around the world, in Europe as well, are really looking to Canada now as a really a clean place to do business, to build things, to grow, which is really great to see. My understanding that our hydrogen projects that are still in development, I think at different levels of development, are also clean. I don't recall the name of the project off of Newfoundland, but I know that they will operate based on wind power, which is really, I think, an incredible project. I know Europeans are looking at that a lot off Eastern Canada and similar types of projects. But and of course, the shorter shipping distance, I guess, for us exporting is helpful as well, right? The less time that we have to ship, the fewer carbon emissions we produce. But one very different angle to all this I wanted to discuss. I know that the focus here today is largely on LNG and export of natural resources, but something that's been really remarkable to see over the span of the past year is really the renaissance in the nuclear space. And I feel I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about this a little bit. But in a very short period of time, we've just seen incredible growth in the amount of interest in the Indo-Pacific region, as well as Canada's strength as a nuclear with our nuclear sector. It really is a great opportunity for us on I guess in terms of providing energy security and helping with the transition. I think there's a growing realization, certainly in Canada, but around the world, that it's an essential puzzle piece in achieving our climate target and also energy security targets. Japan, I know, has there's a unique history and political dynamic here. There are certain markets where we're not looking necessarily to expand nuclear or export nuclear technology. But we do have a long history of being an exporter of uranium to Japan to support its nuclear sector. I'm not sure where that goes in the future, but I think it's important to note that Canada now is home to, if I'm not mistaken, 2 of the 7 civilian nuclear technologies for nuclear power technologies. The CANDU reactor, it's still proprietary now, being Atkins-Realis, but also Westinghouse through the Cameco and Brookfield acquisition. So we have 2 of the I guess leading large-scale reactor technologies. There's also a lot of development toward SMRs, small modular nuclear reactors. One of the development taking place between a joint venture with Hitachi, right, the GE Hitachi joint venture, which is exciting to see. So we're seeing a lot of interest, and I think there's a lot of scope for Canada to play a larger role in helping economies across the region. I guess enter that market and to produce energy in a cleaner way. And I guess that gets to one just final point I want to note, and I know a few others mentioned this, but we really need to think in the context of the Canada-Japan relationship, not just what we can do in this market, but what we can do across the region. And if we really want to reduce emissions and help the region to grow in a sustainable way, you really need to look at Southeast Asia, for instance. And I'll use Vietnam just as an example. You have an economy that is growing extremely quickly, especially in the northern corridor in Vietnam, a rapid expansion of its industrial base. The government does, as far as I can tell, does not know how it's going to secure the energy it needs to continue to feed that sector. If it can't get the LNG that it hopes to import, it just started importing LNG last year, for instance. It will use coal, and I don't think we want that to happen. So it's important for Canada and through the trading houses in Japan and others to find ways to help countries in Southeast Asia to industrialize, but in the cleanest way possible. I think we have a lot to offer through technology and partnerships, and so I think Canada and Japan can work together a lot to support our partners in that part of the world. Similar dynamic in the Philippines and Malaysia and so on and so forth. So I think that's something that we really need to think about, and how we can collaborate more in helping the rest of the Indo-Pacific region as it works to decarbonize and produce a more secure energy supply chain.
All right. Now we have started to get some questions in the chat box, so I'm gonna kind of, I guess, flip to my last, set of themes here, and then we'll take some of those audience questions. I guess, looking at this question of global partnerships, to the point you were just making, Trevor, I wanted to turn it over to Nishizawa-san. What are you most optimistic about, having heard all of this and in the work that you do, when you think about the Canada-Japan energy relationship?
Well, yes, I would like to emphasize that the confidence and the trust between 2 countries have been established through the experience of LNG Canada. As you know, LNG Canada is going to start production soon, but the roadmap to date has not been so flat. It was 2009, 15 years ago, that my team, back then I was working for Mitsubishi Corporation, my team at Mitsubishi started to hatch the original concept of LNG Canada together with our friends of the Korean Gas Corporation and Shell. And it took almost a decade, 10 years since then, to take final investment decision in 2018. And to the best of my knowledge, LNG Canada needed to have as many as 15,000 times of meetings with indigenous people before taking FID. And this was necessary process to establish trust. And even after FID, LNG Canada needed to overcome many issues, including but not limited to COVID, cost overrun, and some protests by some NGOs. But supported by Canadian government and by industry people, by project owners, and by LNG customers in Asia, and of course, by lots of indigenous people's groups, LNG Canada is now about to fly. So I believe that this is nothing but a proof that we made it happen. We, by which I mean to say all the stakeholders who wished to develop vast amount of cleaner gas sleeping underground in Western Canada for indigenous communities and for the world. And before LNG Canada, no one believed that this becomes real. And now the energy corridor between Canada and Asia is to become real. So now we share strong confidence and trust among all the stakeholders. So I'm very optimistic about the future of Canada to grow as more and more reliable partner of Japan and Asian countries. And last but not least, I would like to introduce a part of speech by Honorable Prime Minister Justin Trudeau at FID ceremony in 2018 of LNG Canada. I'd like to quote, okay, today's announcement by LNG Canada represents single largest private sector investment project in Canadian history. It is a vote of confidence in the ceremony, in the country that recognizes the need to develop our energy in a way that takes the environment into account and that works in meaningful partnership with indigenous communities, unquote. So why not? Why don't we vote for Canada? Okay, this is my answer, Shannon-san. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'll turn it over to Charlene. You know, having heard that optimism, you know, what are you most optimistic about in terms of Canada's ability to deliver?
Well, I think that it's really important that you really embrace Indigenous people in the conversation where we can share knowledge and, you know, our expertise to collectively advance not only the environmental and economic objectives for these projects to be built. I feel like we have the tools already in the Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program, and we need to act on it now. You know, one of the mottos that the First Nation Major Projects Coalition has is that we're stronger together. And I really believe that not only in the context as Canadians, but also just partnering with other countries, nation to nation, and also, you know, First Nations as nations themselves in having partnerships with project developers, creating those co-ownership opportunities, and also partners in the regulatory process. There's a lot of policy change that needs to happen, and I feel that we could be at the forefront of making this happen so that we can decarbonize our economy here in Canada and globally. Our friend from Japan talked about, you know, the need for clean power because they're still running on coal. And there's a really good synergy that can happen here. And I think in terms of working with industry and government, you know, the First Nation Major Projects Coalition has many examples where we've been working with the Canadian Energy Regulation and Impact Assessment Agency to co-develop reconciliation and ensure that policy is has Indigenous concepts in the regulatory framework. We've also worked with the University of Ottawa, Positive Energy, to develop a deeper understanding of energy development Canada that requires a clean and sustainable energy system. So how does that work? How do we collaborate? How do we all work together? And then I think about working with international sustainability standard boards and other organizations to ensure that our First Nation values and ESG are reflected in their frameworks. And we have done a lot of work in this front over the years, held a lot of roundtables, and we continue to do that. I also, believe that just supporting First Nations and implementing the Spirit of the Land toolkit will really help our members address their environmental and cultural impacts of their rights when it comes to cumulative impacts. I know as a First Nation community, we had concerns when this new development was coming in, and as Karen said, that a lot of our people, this is really new and didn't have understanding what LNG was. So there was a lot of knowledge sharing and understanding about how clean this is and how we'll be helping global markets by getting on board and supporting these projects going forward, but in a meaningful way where I talked about having equity and a seat at the table, and our voices are being heard, and that goes right down from our elders to our young people and our members, really guiding us into this process so that we all can meet this goal of a clean energy. Everything's connected as First Nation people, and one of the things that we always say is all our relations. So when I think about working together with government and industry, it's a must. And I believe that, and I know that we will be at the forefront as Indigenous people.
Thank you. I want to, now that we're, I want to give Jeff Tonkin a chance to jump back in, because I'm going to weave some of the audience questions into the questions to make sure that we have a chance to cover everything. So Jeff, there are two questions here that I think might be for you. And then I'm going to go back to kind of our conversation around optimism. But I think these two questions are both, should we be optimistic? One is, US LNG exports were blocked, or new permitting was blocked by the Biden administration and kind of environmental activists. Could the same thing happen in Canada? Can LNG supply be stable over the years? And I think a second related question is, Japan is expecting the rapid power demand increase because of data centers, AI, semiconductor factories, et cetera. LNG power is being recognized as important. How quickly can Canada deliver more LNG? So I think the two questions are, how fast can you get more LNG out? And, how stable is that supply? And maybe, as a producer, giving some perspective on that.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for the question, Shannon. But I just want to make a few comments after what I've heard today. The first thing is, I want to congratulate Charlene and Karen for their comments. They very well represented their thoughts on what it takes to have Indigenous partnerships and what is really going on with the First Nations and what's really going on inside of their territories and all the positive things that are coming from investment. And I think that this is a huge change from where we've been, which gets back to, can we deliver LNG? So we've seen a huge movement in the last, I'd say really the last 5 years, and from a social aspect, which is, it's taken a long time to build these partnerships. It's taken a long time to build the trust of the Indigenous people with the oil and gas industry. And I think, unfortunately, we have bad actors in our industry, and you see it across all businesses where people come in, they make promises that they just can't deliver on. They have nothing to do with the energy industry, and it taints everybody's relationships. So we have that as a starting place. And the word reconciliation has a whole number of meanings to it. So when you step back, what's gone on is our industry and people generally have built this trust with the First Nations, and the good people have risen to the top, and that trust has been built. And there's no question that the Indigenous people of Canada, not just British Columbia, need to participate, one, in the energy industry, but two, in all industries. And I don't think the people of Japan may understand the location of some of the First Nations we're dealing with. They live in the far north, and it's a very difficult place to live. And they need our support to create an opportunity for them to be able to invest in our industry. And I think that's what's gone on here. And the result of that is that the First Nations that are participating, and I'm hopeful it'll be not just the ones in Western Canada, but across Canada, get to participate as equity owners. And that's what Charlene was talking about, and Karen, a seat at the table. That seat is the seat where they're making business decisions along with the oil and gas industry to determine how these projects are going to work. The result of that is that those people that are participating, the economic influence of that is going to build the self-respect of all those First Nations. And the result of that, I am hopeful, we'll see that the youth, they're the ones who are going to get the benefit of this. The youth are going to get the opportunity to flourish, one, inside their territory, but two, by getting university educations and taking the best jobs both inside their territories. But as an example, we had a number of youth from several First Nations come to our offices so they could see how Calgary works, where we're based out of. We provided them with opportunities to go to the university, where the university provided the youth with opportunities so they could see, you know, what goes on at these universities and what education is available to them, and how does that fit with their own territories, with their own interests, with their own responsibilities. So there's a whole social level going on here that really doesn't come out. I think Charlene and Karen really talked about that. And so that's just one level here. The second level, when you go back up to 40,000 feet, is I know that the youth of those First Nations and my own children want a clean environment. And liquefied natural gas provides Canada with the opportunity to sell that gas to countries such as Japan, where we'll use that clean gas to replace coal. And it also brings the opportunity then to have clean air, which then blows back to Canada. So the youth today have really pushed this. They're the ones who are talking about clean air for the world, not for a specific little region, but for the world. And so the first thing is Canada has the opportunity to provide responsibly produced energy to places such as Japan. So number one, we fix the environmental issues that we see so that Japan can grow, so it can have energy security, because Canada believes in the rule of law. Our women are educated. All of our children are educated. They get to vote. We respect everyone's rights. And that's what Canada is selling. We're selling clean energy and the rule of law. The reflection of that, of course, is that then the respect that we have for the Indigenous nations, that is the oil and gas industry, and the hours and hours and thousands of people that have worked together to create that relationship, is now going to move forward where, as both Charlene and Karen said, they have a seat at the table, and they deserve to have a seat at the table. And now I'm looking for, not only are they going to have a seat at the table, but they're going to enjoy that economic benefit so that their youth infiltrates all of Canada and gives us the opportunity to learn about their First Nations. Charlene mentioned that the people who they like to stay with inside their territories, and they like to learn about those territories. But the next step, as I see it, is they're going to educate Canadians, and then I'm hopeful other members of the world, other countries, other people, they're going to educate them about the First Nations. So there's a number of steps going on here. And the third thing, of course, is the economic benefit of Canada. We, as you well know, Shannon, are one of the largest providers of both raising capital and for our GDP in Canada. And that our industry can grow materially. So now let's get back to that question. Are we going to get shut down like the US has? So when we started down this road, and that LNG Canada first started, it was going to be our first project. We're just getting it on now. The US has grown to the largest exporter of natural gas in the world, and we don't have one. So we are now, with the help of the First Nations and all of our partners, in a position to sell our resource, and we have a much bigger resource in the Montney. So I see over time Canada being one of the largest natural gas exporters, and we have the environment to push that forward because we believe in a clean environment. That's what we're selling. That's what we're selling. So we're not going to get shut down by the government. The reality is, and Canadians recognize it, is we need to bring capital to our country. And so this is one way of attracting capital to the country to meet our own goals of Indigenous reconciliation and to provide a clean economy. So I would say today Canadians aren't in the same place as the US, and they have a different view of how we got to where we are to be able to sell energy. So am I optimistic? You bet. But I'm only optimistic as long as we respect everybody's rights. And that, unlike a lot of countries, means we seek input from everyone and we move together. We can call it partnerships, we can call it understanding, we can call it teams, but the reality is we need to grow together to accomplish all of these things and not railroad anyone. And as long as we do that, Canada is in for probably the largest growth as a natural gas exporter in the world, and we'll probably get there.
All right. Well, that's very optimistic. I know we've come to our time. I wanted to just tell Trevor, one of the questions we got is for you. And I'll send you a screenshot of this. There was a question of, are there any opportunities to partially invest in LNG interests on the west coast of Canada? Can we receive support? Is the Business Council of Canada in Tokyo a point of contact? So maybe give a quick thumbs up if they can get in touch with you. All right, and we'll try and make sure we make that connection. Karen, I wanted to give you a chance to quickly weigh in on your optimism. We heard Nishizawa-san's optimism and Jeff's optimistic and Charlene's optimistic. So Karen, a quick word of optimism as we wrap up.
I think just listening to all of the panelists and sort of the history of how we've come to today, I think we've come a long way in the last 10 years from no involvement to having a seat at the table, having a voice at the table, and overcoming all of the obstacles like the blockades, the opposition, the NGOs. You know, all we want from the Indigenous perspective is to come from poverty to prosperity. That's every leader's hope. You know, we talk about zero emissions. Well, Indigenous communities want to get to zero poverty, zero unemployment, zero social issues. So I think we're all on the same page. We're all in a space where we want Canada to thrive. Canada's at this advantage where we have an abundance of natural resources that we can share with the rest of the world. We're in a space where we can lower greenhouse gas emissions. If we are truly care about our world and the emissions, then this is the way to go. We need to continue with the messaging that we can get other countries like Asia off of coal so that we can have them burn our natural gas, which is also good for the energy transition as well. And it's affordable. We need to keep it affordable. So I think it's a win-win-win across the board. And these projects that have been are on their way are going to showcase to Canada and to BC and to the Indigenous people, especially those that are in opposition, that we can do this. You know, I hear Jeff talk about the youth. We put it in a frame of the next 7 generations. That's what we're here for, is we want to see them thrive. We want a better quality of life for them in the 7 generations to come. Ms. Sai.
Thank you, Karen. Okay, I have one question for Nishizawa-san and one question for Trevor, and then we'll take an end to our evening here. But Trevor, you and I had spoken before this panel about how important it's been that leaders have come to talk to Canadians about their needs. And I guess, you know, as we can continue to engage the Indo-Pacific, you know, what would you want to, do you have any comments about that and the ongoing importance of that?
Yeah, thank you. And you know, it's really probably the most important point for us when we're here, certainly when our CEO and our members are here. But you know, our I guess appeal to folks on the call here is, you know, if you want Canadian energy, please make that case time and time and time again. We need to hear it often. You know, Prime Minister Kishida was very effective when he came to Canada in early 2023. His team did a great job articulating why Canadian LNG is so important to Japan's national security, why LNG Canada is so important for replacing Russian gas. It was all very helpful, and I think it helped in the policy community. Folks understand, you know, coming from Ottawa, the discussion is sometimes very different, or this is very distant. People don't always understand how important this issue is for Japan and its national security. And I think it's really helpful for you know, business leaders, for the government to continue to make that case. We want a steady drumbeat. We want to keep hearing about why Canada is important, and that helps us in the policy community, I think, in the business community, to really advance this issue, because Canadians do want to help. I mean, that's the optimistic note. Canadians do care about our place in the world. We want to help our partners and friends, but there's so many competing interests that pop up all the time. There's so many things that are happening. People get distracted. Just continue to make the case, and Canadians understand why this is so important and keep it as a top of mind issue. So please help us help you. And at the same time, Canadians need to be here more often, right? I'm glad to be here now full time and have our members here more often. But others, you know, having delegations come to town is unfortunate. With this visit, timing didn't work, but hopefully in the near future we'll welcome Energy for Secure Future delegation here to Tokyo. But we need more people to come to town and talk about Canada and the Indo-Pacific region. I think on both fronts we can do some really great work. But please keep making the case for Canadian LNG here, and that helps us back home.
All right. Well, we're already a few minutes over time, so I want to respect folks. So thank you, Evan, for your questions. And we're going to maybe find ways to kind of get answers onto our website, because there are some great additional questions here. I want to just once again thank all of our panelists today for your time and insights. I think we've had a great discussion, and we're grateful that we were able to have this conversation. You know, even though we had to postpone our original mission plans, but they're going to come back, and we look forward to seeing all of you in person in the new year. And in the meantime, thank you all. Arigatou gozaimasu again, and have a good evening or a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.